Kia ora koutou katoa, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning for our online LTP session. My name is Lorna White. I'm the GM, Group Manager for Community Outcomes. I'll be mediating this session. And joining us is Mia Len and Bruce Hinson, who is our GM, Group Manager for Operations, who will be helping with the technical questions. Just for procedural clarity, if we could just have everyone mute themselves, and also if you could be off camera, then it just saves the bandwidth and making sure that things stream well. We will start with just a couple of questions, generally just about the LTP. Thanks to everyone who's already sent through several questions which we can address, and then if you have additional questions, feel free to add them into the chat and we will get to them as we can. So welcome. So, Mia Len and Bruce, first off, if you could just share just generally the basics of the LTP and why we have one.
So I might hand that over to Bruce, because the Bruce and his team have been in the nuts and bolts of making all of this happen. Yes. And what will happen after they've finished, they'll bring it to us as governance team and say this is what we've got, and then we'll work through it.
So hi everyone. Local government councils, we do a long-term plan every 3 years. So the long-term plan is a 10-year plan. It sets out what we're going to do for 10 years, some of the objectives we're going to achieve for our communities, as well as all our projects and programs that we're doing. So it's a 10-year program. Every 3 years it gets revised and a new one gets done, because obviously things change and quite rapidly in today's world. So the first process of that is we're busy with at the moment as staff, is pulling together a lot of information, a lot of ideas from community boards and council around what they want to see into the future and what they believe their communities want to see, and we compile that up into a draft long-term plan. As Mia Len said, we take that through a number of workshops with elected members and work out where are we going for our district and for our communities over the next 10 years. Once we have that to the standard of a draft long-term plan that the council and the mayor are happy with, then that'll go out to the public. And basically here's all our ideas for the next 10 years. This is what we've heard over the last 3 years. This is where we're planning on going. And then we seek the feedback and submissions from all of you, from the public, around what you might want us to do. And so we get submissions. We're normally out for a month, and that's normally around March, April next year, where it's open for a month. People can submit their ideas. They can say, look, we love what you've proposed here. We hate what you've proposed here. We think you should be adding this in. And just basically have an opportunity to really get engaged and get involved in what's going on in their communities and in the district for the next 10 years. We go through a process, then people can come and speak to those submissions if they want. The mayor and councillors and staff will listen to those submissions and those oral submissions. There might be changes made as a result of those submissions. That often happens where people come up with good ideas, or they send a strong signal. The community might say, we don't want you to focus on that, we want you to focus on this area. Changes will then get made as a result of that. The draft LTP will then be updated and turned into basically a final LTP. That'll come back to Mia Len and the council in June next year, and then they'll consider that and they'll make a decision, yep, we're happy with that, and they'll adopt that as long as they're happy with it. And then from 1 July, that new long-term plan starts. So that's basically what's going on. And obviously at the moment we're doing a bit of pre-engagement, such as this online meeting. We've also got meetings out and about in different communities that a number of our staff have been attending. There was one in Coromandel yesterday, one in Taiwan. And so just really trying to seek input and seek people's views and really build this together as we move forwards, really. So that's a run through.
And saying that as well, we talk about the projects, but also there's a lot of things in the LTP that we actually have to do, that we're obliged to do. So could you both elaborate on that?
So look, the LTP is defined under the Local Government Act 2002. So it is something that we are required by law to put in place for our communities, and in the format of the LTP is fairly strictly set out in the LGA. So what we'll go through, and Bruce will elaborate a bit more on this, and the team will elaborate on this, we have a number of things that we have to do and are required to do under law, and that's kind of our starting place. In and around that, we've got to do the things that our communities want and expect us to do, and the things that they would like to see. One of the things that, and the key difference, I guess, with this LTP, one of the things that we've deliberately focused on in this LTP process is to shine a lens not just on what we're doing over the next 3 years and 10 years, but to also encapsulate the things that our communities have said they want to see, forward-thinking visions and ideas that might take us out 30 and 50 years into the future. And some of the planning that we've got to do that for those visions is planning that has to start happening now. And our shoreline management program is a really good example of that, where we know some of the things that are coming down the line in terms of climate change, in terms of our changing environment, changing coastline. And the planning for that, while it might not be actions that we're taking necessarily in this 3-year or 10-year program, they are things that we have to be preparing for now.
And also, Bruce, if you just maybe elaborate about the legislative and regulatory obligations.
So thanks, Lorna. Adding to what Marilyn said, there are a number of different things that we do need to include in the long-term plan. So there's a number of strategies. So a financial strategy about how we move forwards. We have an infrastructure strategy as well that goes in there. The infrastructure strategy focuses on 30 years. So again, it picks up on some of the stuff that Marilyn's been talking about, that obviously 10 years in some ways is a long time frame, but in other ways it's actually a very short time frame. So the infrastructure strategy over 30 years, we have roading activities in there, we have Three Waters activities in there, we'll also have solid waste in there. So there's lots of things where we're looking a lot further out, and those legislative requirements around those different strategies are very important. And there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, preparing all that work, the staff working through that, taking it through council to get those strategies up to date and then include them in there in the long-term plan as the legislation requires.
And in some ways, one of the challenges for us as a council, and the challenge that every council around the country faces, is that we are subject to the dynamics of what happens in central government politics. So in some ways, we sometimes feel like a bit of a cork bobbing around on an ocean as we get changes of government and we get changes in a good example is Three Waters. Are we going in this direction? Are we going in that direction? Resource management changes. So as we get changes in central government, we are going to see the direction that local government has to go change. And quite often that presents challenges because it takes a long time to get the ship moving in one direction and then you've got to turn it in a different direction. So some of the challenges that we've had leading up to the election, you'll see in the process that Bruce describes. Now that we've had an election, we've got a bit more of a steer on what happens next, but those challenges still exist. And the future for local government discussions that we're having with Local Government New Zealand, which is a collaboration of all the councils around the country, have some very strong recommendations that we're working through to go back to this government with and say, look, funding is an issue. 4-year terms, for example, is one thing that we would like to see. So there's a number of changes that we're working through, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we go through.
So let's touch on a couple of the things with the government, right? So we know National's put out its 100-day plan, which people can have access to. It's publicly available. One of the things we are all well aware of is the Three Water reforms, right? And so there is going to be some significant changes to that, and that will affect our long-term plan and all other councils around the country. So if you can share a bit more information on that.
So that's, I'm glad you raised that, Lorna, because that is something that we've had intense discussions with. First of all, at a regional level, so when I'm talking regional, we're talking about the 11 councils that are within the Waikato region. We knew that there was a chance that the current legislation on Three Waters would be repealed. We got a clear steer from the National Party and the ACT Party. Now that we know that we've got a new government coming in, we know that that current legislation is going to be repealed within 100 days. So the question is, where does it leave us? There's been intense discussions going on with the mayors and the councils and the EE chairs around the Waikato district about what happens next. What do we do? Do we wait for the government to come back to us and say, look, here's a format that we want Three Waters to sit under, or do we be proactive and put some ideas together and go back to the government? So we know step one, they'll repeal the legislation. What we don't know is what they're going to replace it with. And so there's discussions going on about putting together programs that we can go back to the government with and say, this is what works for us. The main thing, the key driving point that we're working on with Three Waters is to maintain local direction, local control, local decision making. But we've still got the challenges of how do we fund our water infrastructure now in the next 3 years, the next 10 years and 30 years down the road. And water infrastructure for us as a district is a real challenge. It's expensive. Our council's done a really good job on this. We're in good shape, but we've got some significant challenges going ahead. So watch this space. You're going to see the current legislation repealed, and then we're working on where we can go next.
Bruce, maybe you can elaborate from a practical sense as well as to how does that mean for how we budget in our long-term plan over the next few years and into the future?
Yeah, it does make it tricky, as Marianne said, is that currently that legislation is that we're not going to be operating Three Waters after July 2026, but we know from that clear signal from the incoming government that they are going to repeal it. So at this stage, we're in a bit of a kind of treading water pattern. So it's a really a high need for us to be flexible, us and council to be flexible, and so that's what we've been. So we are including the Three Waters budgets in the long-term plan because that's the direction that has been signalled, is that it is going to be repealed and we will need to do that. So we've done a lot of planning with the teams across what we need heading into the future over the 10 years and the 30 years for the Three Waters services and infrastructure. And as Marianne said, we're in pretty good shape around drinking water. So we've been going through a big upgrade program for our drinking water treatment plants for the last kind of 5 years or so. So that's a 35 million plus program. We've got about two plants left to do out of that program. And it is a challenge for a district such as ours, where we've got, you know, something like 11 water treatment plants and 11 wastewater plants around the district. We've got a lot of infrastructure spread across a reasonably large area, being funded by a fairly small number of ratepayers. So it does present a set of challenges, but the team have worked hard on what they think we need to be doing heading forwards, what we know from legislative constraints that we need to be doing around Three Waters. And so all that stuff's gone into the draft long-term plan budgets that we've been working up. They take into consideration growth in certain areas as well, looking at where areas might grow, and therefore we need to install, you know, more pipes and more capacity at our treatment plants. So all those different elements get built into the plan. They get programmed over the 10 years and then again over the 30 years in that infrastructure strategy. And that's information that we put forward. Obviously, that has a big impact on rates. These things, this infrastructure is very costly for everyone across the country. And so it's a pretty serious thing.
We could talk about planning for that growth. I know, Marianne, you're a strong advocate around investigations at Fishinga for a separate or an additional water service or source. What other areas are being investigated or are in the plan or proposed to be in the plan at the moment?
In terms of providing infrastructure?
And even just investigation of feasibility.
Okay. So I might ask Bruce to update on what's already in progress, and then I can talk a little bit about, you know, the vision for the future that our communities are saying to us they want to see happen.
Yeah, so happy to do that. So so as Lorna's said, Whitianga is one that Marianne was pretty focused on and still is around growth. Obviously, we know that Whitianga and the Mercury Bay area has experienced pretty strong growth over the last 10 or 20 years, and it looks like will continue to do so. So having enough water for our consumers, particularly during that the dry summer peak when we have all our guests and visitors and batch owners coming down, is critical for us. So we do have a project underway at the moment that has gone quite far down the path of looking at options around sourcing additional water in Whitianga. So we take water from one stream in Whitianga and bring that into town. And we've got a water treatment plant there that was recently upgraded. It was the first one to be upgraded across the district about 5 years ago. So we're looking at where we might want to source more water from. And the challenge with that is there's a lot of environmental constraints under the Resource Management Act around how much water you can take from different sources. And it's important that we protect the environment and make sure that we're not doing harm to the environment. So it's not as simple as just taking as much water as we need from the river and drying it out or putting it into low flow conditions. So it's really about looking at what's viable, what other streams or water sources are there in the area. We've done a number of investigations looking at whether there's viable bore water in the area, because obviously some of our townships are well served by groundwater, others not so much. So there's work going on looking at what the options are there. Storage of water is another option. Again, that comes with a very hefty price tag. Whilst it's something you can do in cities like Auckland, where you've got a huge ratepayer base, for most provincial centres like ours, especially with so many individual communities, storage of large volumes of water, say 3 months of water storing for over summer is cost prohibitive. And so there's some real challenges there, but the team are working hard on that. And there's a couple of other areas around the district, particularly Mercury Bay, where we're looking at investigations around sourcing good, reliable sources of water to take us into the future. The only other thing I'd mention before I finish up on that is there's the sourcing more water, but there's also the how we're using it and making sure that we're not wasting water and we're being efficient with what we're doing. So obviously we encourage all of our consumers to conserve water as much as they can, and we try and do the same as ourselves as council with any facilities we have. We also have programs underway all the time looking at leakage reduction, so reducing how much water might be leaking from pipes, reducing leakage from water fittings that might be in public toilets or buildings, those kind of things. So that's the other side of the equation, is rather than just going for more water, is looking at how we use it more efficiently. So yeah.
As part of our LTP process, councillors were asked to evaluate some information and some statistics and land on a growth projection for the district, which allowed us to include in our planning and our financial forecasting some numbers that the team could then go away with and complete the rest of the LTP strategy. So we landed on a medium growth projection. So the choices obviously were low, medium and high. We are constrained in this district in terms of available land, and this has obviously become quite critical in terms of the need for additional housing. And we have a very diverse district, so parts of the district have more land available than others. Thames, we know, for example, Thames and the coast, very constrained, and there's been some good work done on our Thames spatial plan to identify what we can do. Other parts of the district, Whangamata, Whitianga, have identified some areas for growth, but we've landed on a medium growth projection, and that gives us some ideas about how we need to plan for financial and infrastructure projections for the future.
That's great. If we could go to another piece of the long-term plan, which has been a huge part of our work since January, and we're talking about Cyclone Gabrielle and also the weather events subsequent and previous to that, and how that's had a huge impact on our district and will have a huge impact on how we budget and what we plan for in the LTP.
So look, one of the harsh realities, and I hesitate to use the word harsh, one of the realities of living in the Thames-Coromandel district is that we live in one of the most beautiful parts of the country, but it comes at a cost, and the cost is that our coastline, we've got 400 kilometres of coastline, our roading infrastructure and our network is vulnerable to extreme weather events. And even before Cyclone Hale, Cyclone Gabrielle, the anniversary weekend storm events, we knew that this was a regular part of the challenges that we were facing, and we would continue to face. We've had an extreme amount of rain this year. It's broken all records. It is something that we will continue to face, and we've only got two choices. One is that we ratepayers pay for the cost of fixing and maintaining the infrastructure when it gets broken, or the government pays. Those are the only two choices. We are fortunate in that our team has done really, really strong work with the government and Waka Kotahi in putting together the funding and the plans that we need to not just fix our broken infrastructure and our roading networks, but also to build back some resilience into that roading network. You've already seen a number of announcements. We've got the 25A bridge underway, but in behind that is a huge amount of really good work that's been done, and it will have some positive benefits for our district, because part of the process has been to include local contractors in that program of works over the next few years, so that our economy, so the money stays in the local economy, so that the jobs stay in the local economy. So, but those are the challenges. And when I talked earlier about the future for local government, discussions that local government is having with central government, a big part of that is the reality that the funding that we get is never enough to maintain the infrastructure and to maintain the levels of service and work that councils have to provide with the ratepayer base that we have. It's just the harsh reality of what we're faced with. We continue to have those conversations with central government. We're backed and supported by every other council in the country who are all facing the same problems, and we will continue to look for better ways to get councils funded so that it's not consistently coming back on the ratepayers as a burden for every time this the events happen, but also the day-to-day things that we've got to provide.
That's great. So just in some like real world examples of the cost of our roads and how expensive it is and how we've had to make space in our budgets to do repairs. Bruce, can you maybe give a bit of a context on that?
Yeah, I can. So during the Cyclone Hale and Gabriel events that Marlene has spoken about that we experienced in January and February of this year, we ended up with in excess of $20 or $30 million worth of damage across our roads. So we across our road network, and this is not the state highway network, it's just the TCDC roads. We had over 100 slips, 100 damaged sites. Some of those were underslips where the road slips away. Some were debris coming down onto the road, which is obviously easier to deal with. You can clear it up and get the road open again. But yeah, it's been a substantial impact on our infrastructure, as Marlene said. The roading network and all of the infrastructure is vulnerable in a district such as ours, so that's a real challenge. Some of you will be aware that we're well underway with the repair to the Thames-Coromandel road, which obviously was cut out during those events. So we've got a local contractor, Kelsey Contractors from Coromandel, who are on site doing a fantastic job, working really hard to get that open. So everything's running on track at this stage, and that'll be open for Christmas, which is really important for our communities, because that's a real lifeline to run across the peninsula, and it's causing a lot of frustration, I suppose, and disruption for people who would normally travel that route, and obviously you have to go a much longer route to go around that. So Thames-Coromandel going really well. Some other sites that we're looking at that we're getting onto would be Blackjack Road in Mercury Bay. Obviously that's got about 2 or 3 sites of damage on that, so we're working on that as well shortly. We have work happening on Colwell Road north of Coromandel, and also the 309 Road, and there's bits and pieces across a multitude of locations, Hotwater Beach Road, Needs Hill Road, everywhere across the district. So the teams are working really hard. It's a huge financial cost to our district, to our ratepayers, and so we've just got to do our best to make sure that we're doing things as efficiently and as well as we can.
So much of the work that's been done has been dependent on us building a very, very strong relationship, and even before January, this work had been developing between our team and Waka Kotahi in particular. January and the early part of February were interesting because right at the beginning of that, we were on our own. Our district had been smashed by anniversary weekend, which affected Auckland, but in a different way, but we were smashed. And so we got a fairly high level of attention, and we got the wheels turning really early on. We had cabinet ministers turning up on the doorstep. We got a fairly high level of attention early on, and it got the process happening. Now later on, when Gabriel came in, we lost some of that, and then we lost a couple of key cabinet ministers, unfortunately, which made a bit of a difference. But by that time, a lot of the groundwork had already been done. A very wise person once said, don't let a good crisis go to waste, and we've certainly jumped in and done what we can to make sure that we've got a process underway, which I think will be to the benefit of our district in the long term.
So if we can elaborate on that, Mayor Len, so we're talking about, the Mayor's responsibility and role is about developing good partnerships with central government and other agencies, as well as our communities. So dealing with Wellington and looking at the Coromandel Roads project and how that will help with our LTP budgeting, if you can elaborate on that too.
It's a challenge. It's certainly, so what happens with our roading network, as everyone knows, we're a mixture of state highways and local roads. The state highway network is critical to not just people getting to and from, but it's critical to the economic well-being of our district. And so that's a message that we pushed really, really hard right from the beginning, that a damaged and interrupted roading network has a critical effect on our economic well-being. Businesses rely on that roading network being open, and it's not just about here's a slip, it's fixed, here's another slip, it's fixed. It's about having certainty and security in the future. One of our major industries is tourism. Tourists need to know that if they make a booking for 6 months down the track, that they're going to be able to get to the hospitality venue or the motel or hotel Airbnb that they've booked. So we focused really hard on building long-term security into that network, and that comes from the strength of those relationships and knowing that we've got a long-term commitment from the government on that investment in the future infrastructure. Now, in the previous government, we got a commitment for $6 billion of investment in resilience and infrastructure rebuild. That was not just for us, that was across Northland, Auckland, Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay. We know that the current government has committed to maintaining that $6 billion. They're not going to go in and remove it. What we don't know at the moment is how much of that $6 billion is going to be directly applied to Thames-Coromandel. But we do know that we've had pretty good indications that there is a program of work committed from that fund, as well as the regional land transport funding that we've been working really hard on at the Hamilton level, so that we can maintain those two funding streams. And we're talking about 10 or 15 years worth of work. I think as we go forward into the future, we maintain those regional and Wellington relationships to keep the wheels turning and make sure that the investment that we need for our long-term future is there, and we don't see it disappear down a hole in other parts of the region which doesn't benefit Thames-Coromandel.
That's great. Also, if we do get that certainty of investment, there's also opportunity around workforce development and planning and upskilling for businesses around the Coromandel. Huge
opportunities. And it's not just about the direct things that you see. So, for example, we know that there's road contractors. We know that there's been a massive effort on supporting our local contractors, because the reality is, and we've had this conversation with Waka Kotahi, when we get a storm event, the roads go out at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's the local contractors that get out there and move the trees and clear the roads. And in the past, what's happened is that they've been left out of the loop when it comes to the major contracts to fix those roads. Those local contractors have deliberately been brought into the loop. And so there's certainty for them to invest in what their plant and machinery and their workforce and their staff. But there's other things that happen around the fringes of that as well. I'll give an example. So We know that there's going to be hundreds of thousands of plants needed for our roading and infrastructure rebuilds across the district. We've got a local nursery run by Ngāti Maru. They employ young people. We've got the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, finding jobs for young people in there. Those plants are going to be part of the rebuild and part of the recovery. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. The recovery process, and it will provide long-term jobs certainty, and I think a lot of optimism and a lot of hope for the future about us rebuilding our district and our economy.
Great. I'm just going to take you now just to some other parts of the infrastructure program and some questions that some people have provided. So Jeffrey Honick, he lives in Coromandel Town. He was just questioning about an all-tide boat ramp facility with a clear channel to the outer harbour of Coromandel Town. You know, we do know that there is quite shallow in that area getting into some of those access points. So is there any plans for development around boat ramps and infrastructure in the harbour?
So there has been quite a lot of work done over the years looking at what the options could be in that area, and unfortunately the challenge is pretty extensive with that area. So the dredging is something that would be extensive to try and maintain any kind of all-tide boat ramp. We do have a consent that expires next year, which we will look to renew, and that's around clearing some of the stuff that is in Furies Creek, obviously, that runs past that Jackson Point boat ramp. So as anyone who has been down there knows that there's extensive amounts of marine sediment and mud, marine mud that builds up, and you know, you can clear it away from the ramp, and 2 tide cycles later it can be back. So it's a real challenge. So it only allows for dredging that consent for about 3.5 months of the year. There's a lot of environmental conditions and reasons for that. So we do a bit of minor dredging, but we have looked into it, and to do anything large scale that would provide all-tide access would be millions and millions of dollars. It would be a huge project. As I say, it's been looked at by a couple of different people as well as council, and nothing's actually managed to get off the ground for that one. So yeah, frustrating, I understand it, no, but it's a real challenge.
I think the blunt reality, and talking directly to Jeff, if you're online, councillors will be faced with a whole heap of choices and funding priorities. That one, as I talked earlier, that one, I know there's a lot of people in the community, particularly in the Coromandel area, that are really keen to see this happen. It's been talked about for a long time. When I talked earlier about the long-term visions, you know, the 10, 20, 30-year plans, we will struggle to get this one into any sort of priority over the next 10 years. That's the blunt reality. It's definitely on the radar, but I think we're going to struggle to see it in this long-term plan, to be honest.
So, you know, there are community aspirations, and again, this is from a resident in Matarangi talking about potentially like a community facility beside the Matarangi boat ramp there. And I guess there has been discussions had with some folk in that area, but I mean, to get this into a long-term plan and to see this as actually viable, take us through the steps as to how that would happen.
Yeah, I can jump in there. So often we do have really good ideas coming from the community and aspirations about what they'd like in an area, such as this Matarangi kind of marine area. Basically, the way to move that forward is gather up all the ideas, gather up everyone's viewpoints on it, and then do a whole lot of investigation work about what's feasible and what's not, looking at what the options are, because obviously whenever we do anything, there'll be a group of people that are really committed and really want a certain thing. But you can guarantee there's going to be another group that are probably just as committed equally to something different. So it's not as simple as we get a good idea and we rush out there and build it. So we have to go through a real options analysis, looking at what the options are, looking at what's feasible. You know, a lot of things aren't feasible, unfortunately, and so we have to be realistic about that. So we go through a lot of options analysis. We look at what could happen, what maybe can't happen, and then work that through in some kind of concept that we can then re-engage with the community and take them through that, because obviously we don't want to rush out there and do things that that the community don't feel like they've been involved in and they don't support. So the team will work hard on that. So I know there's been a number of meetings. The team put together a bit of work and they're ongoing with that work specifically around Matarangi. But that's a good example, and there's lots of sites like that around the district where people have good ideas, and so they have to be taken through an investigation phase before we can get them to the stage where they're a robust project that we can put in front of me and Len and the councillors and say, look, is this something we want to invest in? Is this something we want to rate our ratepayers for? Because obviously those are big decisions and they're not taken lightly. We can assure you that the Mayor Len and the councillors, they really take the time to go over all of these considerations. It's not as simple as just doing a project and rating people for it. So all that work needs to be robust and challengeable, and Mayor Len and the councillors will challenge staff on that stuff and say, look, are there other options? Should we be doing this? What are the upsides? What are the downsides? So we need to make sure we've got it to a really robust standard that can stand that scrutiny, and that we know that we're spending public money wisely.
So I think, look, one of the things I want to be really clear about, we have had fairly robust discussions with our staff and with our council about making sure that we capture visions and ideas from our community of things that we want to see happen that we don't necessarily have funding for, or we can't necessarily afford under our current ratepayer paid model. And the reason we say this is because we want to make sure that if there's a really good idea from the community for a project that they want to happen and that we would like to see go forward, we do some initial work on the preparation, design, scoping for that to get it to the level of what's commonly known as shovel ready. Having done that, then there are often outside funding options. Now, this can be central government, this can be community funded, this can be philanthropy, or it can be charities. We've seen again and again examples where if we do the homework, if we scope the idea, if we talk to our community, land on something that the community wants, and the only missing link is the funding, then there are often options about how we can fund that doesn't place the burden back on the ratepayers. So one of the focuses that we're doing specifically is on working on designs for shovel-ready projects, even ones that we don't necessarily have the funding for. There's a little bit of a danger in that, and we've got to be a bit careful because everything that we do as a council is audited, and if we're going through and doing things that we don't have funding for, there's a fine line to steer in terms of making sure that we comply with our audit requirements. But that doesn't mean to say we can't do it. It just means to say we've got to get our process right.
So when we talk about the financials, so when we're talking about, whether it's feasible or a business case, so that's an operational cost. And how much, Bruce, remind me, how much operational money is 1% on the rate?
It's roughly $800,000 of operational spending that adds 1% onto the district rates.
And then capital?
And capital is 10% of that. So it would be 8 million gives you 1% on the rates for capital. So, and the reason for that is that capital was loaned and paid off over a number of years, much like a mortgage. So it costs less per year, whereas the operational costs, they'll come straight onto the rates. And so that's another reason, picking up on Mayor Len's points around we've got to be we're treading that fine line around what we are investigating, what we're doing work and feasibility on, what we're building up, because those costs do go straight onto the ratepayer. So we need to be careful that we're not running around doing a whole load of things that might not eventuate. But we also need to have some plans in the bottom drawer, as Mayor Len says, that are shovel ready. And we've seen that happen over a number of years around different funding sources come to light. And if you're ready with your plans, you can jump to the front of the queue. These things happen quite quickly, especially from central government. There's no time to suddenly start kicking off an investigation project. You need to be ready to go. So it's always useful to have a few of those sitting in the bottom drawer.
So I've got a question from Kevin Crawford about funding, and he's just asked, please describe how the funds received from Waka Kotahi NZ Transport Authority. So their funding assistance rate, which they call the FAR, for adverse weather events, up to 91% to events of $30 million over 2 years for the TCDC roading network are being applied in the annual plan and LTP. So So that this external funding is transparent and community facilities deferred in funding and the annual plan can be restored. So I think we're just trying to get some clarity about what the FAR.
So I'm not sure I've picked up on all of that, but and it does get a little bit complicated. So so bear with me. But yeah, the FAR or financial or funding assistance rate that we do get from Waikato, which is the government, for the majority of our roading we do, not all of it. Footpaths and streetlights we don't get funded for, but for a lot of the other roading we get funding from Waikato, as all councils do around the country. And there's different FAR rates for different councils. Our FAR rate, our standard FAR rate is 51%. So for every $1 we have to spend on our roads, on maintenance and operating them, we get 51 cents in the dollar from Waikato, the government, and our ratepayers pay the other 49 cents. So that's the standard rate. What happens is when you have big weather events, which as we've talked about, we do experience a lot in this district. Once you have had a number of weather events that have come to a cost of more than 10% of what we would usually spend on roading in 1 year. So if we're spending, for ease of numbers, $10 million and, we get just over $1 million worth of damage, our FAR rate will actually move up to an enhanced FAR rate, they call it. So they add another 20 cents onto that. So then it's a 71 cent subsidy that we're getting. And then our ratepayers are obviously paying the 29 cents. There's another step again when you have really extensive damage like we had, where they'll go another 20 cents. And so you end up so for us, we end up at 91 cents, which is, fantastic because as Marianne said, the burden to try and carry for just our ratepayers for all these, millions and millions of dollars of repairs to our roading network is too much for the ratepayers to bear. So we need that additional funding. There are a lot of requirements around that. There's timeframes, and it's not quite so simple. They have a lot of different work categories around recovery and reinstatement and response and all those types of things. But I suppose what we would say is that you can rest assured that we work as hard as we can, and Marianne and the councillors do, to maximise what money we do get out of Waikato, and we really try hard to get whatever we can to ease that burden on the ratepayers because they are such high costs. So, yeah.
And as Bruce said, the FAR rate gets complicated, and one of the complications is that typically the FAR rate, when you get a storm event, the requirement is that you rebuild the road to what it was before. What we've been really clear with the government of Waikato about is that we think that that's been a broken system for a long time. When we rebuild in places like Ruamahunga Bay, we want to see it built back better. And that aligns with the statements that we've had from Waikato and from the government on their regional land transport and national land transport policy statements. But the FAR rate as it stands at the moment doesn't cover building back better. It basically just says put it back the way it was. Well, the way it was broken. The way it was doesn't prepare us for future events. But at the moment, the FAR rate doesn't cover us building back better. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't funding available for that, but the pathway through to closing the gap and getting that additional funding is where those government relationships and those relationships with the regional partners become absolutely critical. So we put a lot of time and effort into trying to get that additional funding so that when we do all this work, we're not just setting ourselves up to fall over again in the next weather event.
That's great. So the stage we're at the moment with the LTP, as we've said, is we're going out, we're just socialising the LTP, the issues that we're grappling with our community, so they're aware of the foundation of what the document will and what we're having to grapple with altogether. In terms of particular proposed consultation items, maybe we can just give a bit of information on where we're at with that as well, that we don't have any at the moment, that we're still working those through, particular consultation points. Yeah,
that's true, Lorna. Often we do, we'll have particular points, as Lorna mentions, a consultation in the long-term plan. So there might be 4, 5, 6 particular areas that when we go out with a long-term plan, it'll have everything in that we've talked about, but there'll be some specific questions, around specific projects or programs or directions that, what do our customers think? Do they think council should be heading in this direction or that direction? So we'll seek feedback. The other thing we often do is we'll have what we call pre-consultation. So we'll maybe And that often happens, it's coming up before Christmas, where we get a few ideas out there and we start putting out some ideas for feedback to see what the community thinks, see what our customers really think about some of these ideas. And that gives us a good guide. Is this something we should be kind of investing more time and effort into moving forwards on, or is this something actually people aren't that interested? So let's focus in other areas they are interested. So yeah, so that work will be happening over the next few months, really building up those specific consultation points.
I think, Laura, you raise a really good point, and one of the things that I committed to doing following the election was a lot more direct engagement with our communities. So we put in place, for example, the community networking days, because we realised that there was a bit of a gap between a community board meeting and then the next community board meeting 6 weeks later, and some of the community groups that we were working with felt that they didn't have this opportunity to really engage with us. So we've used the community networking days and some other engagement with communities around specific projects that will be included in the LTP. So a really good example is stormwater. We know that following these weather events, it's really highlighted some areas that need to be addressed, not just now, but in the long term. And stormwater is one. So stormwater in Whangamata, Cook's Beach, for example, we know that these areas are vulnerable when we get extreme weather events. So we've engaged separately with these community groups and with people that are working in their communities. And these will be incorporated as part of our LTP discussions, and we want to hear a lot more from our communities. We want to have a lot more discussion and engagement, so to make sure that when we finalise our LTP, we've got that right and we're reflecting what our communities want to see.
Absolutely, which is my good opportunity just to remind people that we do have a drop-in session in Thames, Whangamata and Whitianga tomorrow. Thames at the Thames Market from 10 to 11:30. Whangamata at the Community Board office 10 to 11:30, and in Whitianga at the Community Board rooms, and that's from 2 till 3:30. So also mindful that our elected members, our Community Board members and our councillors and staff will be at those. This is an opportunity, as Megan said, we do have networking sessions, but also to hear from you all about potential ideas and proposals, so that we may have some ideas of what we may also have as particular consultation points.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I'll be at the Thames Market tomorrow at 10, so get your raincoats on and come down. We'll have our ears on, we'll be ready to listen, and yeah, look forward to seeing you down there.
I think one of the questions that's come up in here, which I think is probably worth touching on before we finish up, and this is about rates. Why do my rates keep going up each year? What do I get for my rates? And the team have done some really good work in trying to shine or put a focus on the way this is done and make it easier for people to really understand what happens to the rates dollar. And I know that they've got a graphic which was used in our annual plan report, which is a fantastic graphic. There it is there up on the screen. That will be part of the LTP documentation that goes out for consultation. For me, in talking to communities and talking to ratepayers, I find this really, really helpful. It doesn't tell the whole picture, but boy, it really helps you to understand what happens with your rates and what the scale of the work and the services that council has to provide. So this is a really good way to get an understanding. And that's available if anyone wants to have that. I'm sure we can email it out to just email Lorna and the team, and we can send it out to folks that want to see that.
And also Michael's sharing, it's on our website. If you just go to the web link that Michael's about to share, which is the tcdc.gov.nz/LTP 2024-2034. Len and Bruce, thank you so much for this morning. That was really great. We will publish this to our website so people can go back and have a look at it. And also we encourage you to come and have a cuppa with us over the weekend. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, Bruce.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you, too.